Judaism. Oh, so sorry. First, we got to finish up our Zionist discussion. So last week we talked about how, just kind of briefly, how the real creators of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement was a movement that started in the late 1800s to say, instead of like just praying for the Messiah to come that will bring us back to the state of Israel, let's go actually try and do it ourselves. Let's go and try and create some sort of state, at least some sort of homeland, if not a state, in the land of Palestine. Actually, the idea was not even necessarily in the land of Palestine, because Herzl's original idea was simply that if the Jews had a place of their own, then it would be they wouldn't be persecuted. So, have you ever heard of this guy, Herzl?
No.
So he was he was basically considered the founder. Everybody recognized him. Half the things in Israel now are named that. There's a city, Herzliya. There's a mountain in Jerusalem called Mount Herzl, where he's buried. It's also a military cemetery. There's I think a dozen other things called Herzl. And he was the founder, and it was his idea was, if we have a state of our own, then the non-Jews will respect us, but they have nothing to see as our contribution to world culture, basically. So I forget what year it came up, but there was actually, before the state of Israel, there was a proposal by the British, because they were trying to appease the Arabs. They didn't want the Jews to come. They offered the Zionists Uganda. And Herzl supported that idea, but it was voted down, because those with some traditional bent said, you can't have it any place but Palestine. When I say Palestine, that's just the name of the area, as we talked about last week. What it was named actually by the Romans, who call it after the Plishtim, the Philistines. They took the name and applied it to the whole country. They renamed. They were so ticked at the Jews, they renamed everything. So one of the things they renamed was the city of Shechem, which is where Yosef was buried. They named it Neapolis, the new city. Well, the problem was the Arabs have no P in their language. They can't even really say the word Palestinian. They pronounce it as a B. So when you change Neapolis to a B, you get Nablus. So the city of Nablus, I don't know if you've ever heard of that one, is actually Shechem. That was kind of a diversion. So this was basically a non-religious movement. It was also very much wrapped up with communism, socialism, that was prevalent at the time. There was even a movement that was somewhat fascist. Fascism didn't necessarily involve like race, except like in Nazi Germany, but there were fascist movements at the same time as communist movements all around the world, and there was a Jewish fascist movement to create their own state as part of the Zionist movement. So the ending of all this is basically that it was a non-religious movement by and large. So the religious reaction was, at the time, actually you had an interesting strange bedfellows. The Orthodox largely, some of them were Zionists. There was an organization called Poale Mizrahi. I think it's usually just spelled with an H. And there was also another group called Mizrahi. And these two groups were pro-Zionist, of religious people. Often, kind of, from my impression is that it was often kind of like what they call in Yiddish a pashat yid, like a simple person who, like, look, I need to work, and it's good to build the land of Israel, and Jews should go to the land of Israel. Like, it wasn't there was some messianic fervor to it. There was also a rabbi named Cook, who became the first chief rabbi of Israel. He was the chief rabbi of Palestine leading up to the independence. He is probably one of the most famous rabbis in Israel. I think his son is actually famous also. But he had an interesting take on everything, and he was ostracized by a lot of the Orthodox world. He was a very, like I said, very famous, very brilliant, very righteous man. And he said, you know what? Them coming to the land of Israel, these non-religious Zionists, yes, it would be good if they were religious, but we should interact with them, and we should. And what they're doing is a holy mission, and it's not necessary that everything, that every good deed be done by a good, a completely righteous person. So like they have a certain righteousness just by the fact that they have this love of the land of Israel, which is by itself a mitzvah. So he has become the poster child, I guess you could say, of the religious Zionist movement. You have, so you have the religious Zionists. You have the non-religious Zionists, right? You have the non-religious non-Zionists. Here, we'll just say non-Z. You have the religious Zionists, and you have the non-religious Zionists. No, I'm sorry, I did that one. You have the religious non-Zionists. Today, this group is largely leftist, anarchist. They call them like peaceniks. They're the people who will go out and protest against the Israeli army and join in Arab riots and stuff like that. People who will protest in this country. The non-religious non-Zionists. I'm sorry, I messed that up. This is actually the normal Israeli. This is most of the Jewish people, right? Most Jewish people today are not religious, but they have an affinity towards the land of Israel. There's an organization called Taglit, in English they call it Birthright, that takes Jewish kids to Israel for their first trip, and it's a charity, and they basically have established that any Jewish teen through mid-20s can go to Israel free for the first time. And that's, like I said, most Jews. Non-religious non-Zionists, right? These are the peaceniks that are trying to basically just cause trouble. You have the religious Zionists. These are mainly guided by Rav Kook, and there are actually places in Israel that one place we stayed is called Kafar HaRoeh. And Roeh, even though it means like seer, is actually an abbreviation for his name, Rav Abraham Hakon or something like that. I forget how exactly it spells it, but it's named after him. There was a terrorist attack in a boys yeshiva a few years, just like maybe 3 years ago. There was Mossad Harav Kook. Mossad Harav Kook actually puts out a lot of publications in the Jewish world too. And then you have the religious non-Zionists. So some people, okay, so on the extreme of this is called Naturi Karta. Naturi Karta is Aramaic for guardians of the city. And you will find these people, these are the ones who go to Iran. They, if there's a movie called Religulous. Did we talk about that movie in the Sukkah? I talked about it with somebody else in the community recently, And Religulous is a movie by Bill Maher where he goes around and makes fun of people.
Oh yes,
of different religions.
Mm-hmm.
So he talks to two Jewish people. One is a guy from this group. This group is shunned, basically, by the rest of the Jewish world. They dress as Hasidim and stuff, but they're completely shunned by even the other religious non-Zionists, like the Satmar, which is a Hasidic group. So, disregarding these first two, because that's not really our topic, the non-religious, the reaction to the State of Israel, some people thought, hey, maybe there's something to here. The Balfour Declaration blew a lot of people away, and that the Britain who owned the land of Israel was okay with Jews going there, at least in 1917, was unbelievable, and that they actually had put it on the agenda and passed it through the League of Nations, saying that there should be a Jewish homeland in the land of Palestine, was unbelievable. You had people who just, they were supportive of it. They aren't sure if it's if it's messianic. There were people who were convinced it was messianic. Then you have the religious non-Zionists. The group. There are, I would say, two groups of these, and there's a rabbi. I listened recently to a tape by Rabbi Gottlieb from Or Sameach, which I actually had been in his class about Zionism at Or Sameach once years ago. He puts the majority of what's called Haredim. This group is largely what the religious Zionists are usually. They wear kippot like I do, the yarmulkes, the beanies. They tend to be kind of somewhat more modern, meaning they have jobs, they go to universities, they go to the army. The army is seen as a religious obligation among them, that to defend Jews and to defend the land of Israel. The religious so then you have in Israel the Haredim. They're at the other end of the spectrum. You basically, when you run into religious Jews in Israel, they will either be, so this is called a kippah sruga, meaning knitted. You will see people like that. You'll see people in black hats. There's Hasidim and non-Hasidim. The people who are non-Hasidim will have a black hat and a black regular suit type coat. They together make the Haredim. When the state was founded, Ben Gurion went to one of the famous rabbis at the time, the Chazon Ish. That's his nom de plume, and he made a deal that said, those who devote their lives to Torah study can be exempt from the army. At the time, that was like a few hundred. I think I saw it was 400 or so at the time. And the non-religious people, like Ben Gurion, were convinced they were going to die out. The truth is that they have very large birth rates. The religious Zionists, although some have quite a few kids, it would be more common to have just a few kids. Whereas you have often families of 8 kids in the Haredi world. So they made this deal and they said, if you devote your life to Torah, you're exempt from the army. If you decide later that you don't want to devote your life to Torah, you have to go into the army. Well, it created this incredibly interesting subculture where it became a badge of pride not to go into the army. But if you don't go into the army, it's very difficult to make a living. Most of the Israeli economy is based on friends that you made in the army, not college. And the Haredim don't like college either. But some, like especially in America, the Haredim who in America will go to get some sort of degree in order to be able to make a living. Well, now you've created this whole subculture that has no way of making a living, and therefore it becomes a badge of honor not to make a living, because that means you never went into the army. It means you have this incredibly and somewhat insane idea, this insane subculture going on with like very little way of making an army, and this has caused huge problems that are with us up to today and make constant news in Israel. There recently was the expiration of the Tau law, which actually was a way of trying to encourage Haredim to go to the army, or at least do national service, and then you could go and you could get into university, you could get all kinds of, you could get a job and whatever. It was found, Israel's a crazy country. They have no constitution, so they have these basic laws, but basically the Supreme Court can just do whatever it wants. It can say, yeah, this law is not, constitution, or not quote unquote okay for whatever reason they want, for virtually no reason. They threw out the Tau law. Well, now they have the problem of what does that default us to? Which is, before there was even though they actually got, the Tau law was dual-edged sword, they got actual deferments that said you do not have to go into the army. But on the other hand, there was also encouragements to go into the army or into national service, like change bedpans in hospitals, that sort of thing, teach underprivileged children. So now they have the problem of they're back to what exactly do you do when there's no law? So now the Haredim can't go into national service even if they want to, because there's no way to actually prevent being called to the army. And they have no method of taking them in and saying, okay, this will exempt you from the army, because that's where, like, by default they're supposed to go. On the other hand, it wasn't enforced. And from about 400, I think, up now it's like 10–15% of the population and the voting electorate is Haredi. Wow. So the Haredim, it depends who you ask. There are some who do serve in the army. They have a bunch of complaints, and a lot of them, some of them have like real legitimacy. They require special stringencies about their food. They also require that they may not have any instructor or anybody basically ever see a female. And in Israel, you have women inducted into the army. They have a shorter service, but they usually serve as instructors. So, now you got to find somebody to instruct who isn't a woman. And that's become a complicated issue. And basically, the Haredim and the non-religious Zionists, actually all the non-religious, even the non-Zionists, but they're actually pretty small in number. Those non-religious non-Zionists, they're constantly at each other's throats. In elections, there was an election. There was an election ad for I saw it several years ago of. There's this non-religious guy, and all these Haredim are like leaping at his feet, and he's like dragging like a string of 6 of them along, saying like this is where the welfare dollars go. We're going to pause. Well, particularly in Israel, that they have, most of them have considered it a badge of honor not to serve in the army, because that means I'm true to Torah and everything, but then they can't get a job. There's a whole welfare system and a crazy mentality that is developed based on this idea. There are Haredim who do serve in the army, and there are units that were recently specifically made for Haredi soldiers, so that they would fulfill all these things. They won't have women instructors and won't have to go. One of the things I heard was that there was one group, they made them go clean a women's bathroom, and they were protesting about the fact that they had to clean a women's bathroom. The army will often, the non-religious soldiers will often mess with the religious. Now, this goes back a way. So you have the deal that Ben Gurion made On top of that, you had you had about an influx in the Sephardi world. The Arabian countries threw out a lot of their Jews, as we discussed last week, and also you had a lot that just came because they, even prior to the creation of the State of Israel, you had an influx of Arabic Jews who were religious. They may not have been great Torah. Some of them were great Torah scholars. I don't want to impugn them, but there were a lot of people who were just basically religious. Like, look, we've always kept Shabbat, we've always kept Kashrut. That's what our entire community did, and we've always done it too. Interestingly, the little side curls that you see Hasidim wearing, the Yemenites also had that custom, even though they were disconnected for hundreds of years from the rest of the Jewish world. They had this custom of having the long payas or payot, and so what happened was the Israeli government, particularly in the 50s, with this influx of Yemenites, they were afraid that like they're ignorant, they're savages basically. We have to educate them, right? So, and if we let them have these huge families that they have, 6, 8 kids or more, they won't be able to support themselves, right? And they had this influx of immigrants that are living in tents, as Israel's trying to absorb these people. So what they did was they would take children away and tell the parents they died. They would give them to a non-religious couple to raise, and people 30, 40 years later trying to find each other. There was a particular story about it, I remember about 10 years ago, I think.
So like in the hospital after the baby was born or something, the hospital would tell them
No, they were living in a refugee camp, right? And they would take the child away, right? I guess just kind of kidnap them and tell the parents, they were taken to the hospital and they died. I guess give them an empty casket and everything. And we don't have open caskets for funerals. So I'm not exactly sure what the details were. I just know that such a thing exists. They also did things in the army, like they would try to, if they had a religious soldier, they would sometimes say, okay, everybody, you have to get leave to go home for Shabbat. It's a small country. Most of the soldiers actually go home for Shabbat. They would say, oh, well, your leave hasn't been approved. You have to, you can't go home yet. They would wait till the last minute before Shabbat starts and say, okay, your leave is approved. So you can't leave the base because it's too late to get anywhere. But if you're non-religious, then you can go anywhere you want. You can go disco in Tel Aviv, and then, you're off. So they would mess with people in the army and stuff, and that was traditionally, I think it's a lot less now. However, you get into these things where there's a butting of heads. The army is trying to socialize people and kind of make them all the same and make this new Israeli. One of the things that Ben Gurion, even, all the way back to the beginning, they emphasized the army was the great socializer. It was going to make everybody equal, socialism, right? And it was going to teach you Hebrew, and you were going to become, ingrained as an Israeli. So, this was all part and parcel of it. So there's a hatred and an animosity that goes back, and it's developed into these camps in Israel that are just, sometimes ridiculous and counterproductive. However, that's not to disparage the real good work that is being done. You have Haredi, Haredi specifically, aid agencies and stuff like that who help out anybody. You have Kiruv organization. Kiruv is what y'all call witnessing in the Christian world, going out and trying to encourage non-religious Jews to become more connected to the tradition and to God and to the Torah. So as I told my Rabbi Kerzner, my friend, that I was going to give this class, I think last time, and it said I'm going to discuss
Rabbi Kerzner?
Yeah, do you know him from Beth Jacob?
Is he there's a Rabbi Kerzner at the Reform Synagogue
no,
in Snellville. Okay.
Okay. Rabbi Kerzner of Beth Jacob.
Okay, no, I don't know him.
Currently attends Beth Jacob. He was actually he had sort of a position. Now he's in law school and not doing anything active in the rabbinate. But I like to bounce ideas off him because he's great. He'll give you like, oh, there's 6 views on that. And he'll know all 6 views. I said I'm going to give this class about the Orthodox Judaism. He said there's 2 views. One is the worst thing that ever happened. One is it's the best thing that ever happened. Oh, so as far as one last thing about the Satmar, in particular, the religious non-Zionists, the ones who are the Haredim, they say there's all these practical problems, you know, like, and it's not, you know, like it's probably not the redemption and everything, and you know we shouldn't, you know, we only have something to do with it if we have to. It's a necessary evil, right? I live in the state of Israel. I have to deal with the government. I live in the United States. I have to deal with the government. The Satmar, in particular, and some of these other religious non-Zionists quote a Gemara that talks about how God made the Jewish people pledge 3 things. I don't remember exactly what they were. Now I blanked on it. But one of them was that we wouldn't en masse go and try and rebel against non-Jews and go back to the land of Israel. And then God made the non-Jews promise not to oppress us too much. So they say, look, that's still enforced. You can't go back. You know, an individual could go back to live in the land of Israel, but you can't go and take it over as a country. You know, until Mashiach comes. The argument on the other side is, well, you know, the other half of the promise is broken. So does our side of the promise really still count? All right. Any questions? Because I'm going to move on to another subject now.
I mean, I'm a little bit lost, but it's because I missed last week, so.
Oh, you missed last week too.
Yeah, so I'll just, you know, when you post it on YouTube,
it's up now.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get around to sending it out. My user ID is letter. That's this. That's har.
YB kosher.
Yeah, YB kosher.
YB kosher.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a username I made up a long time ago. I thought it was funny, and now I'm stuck with it. No, I use it all the time because it's just easy to remember now.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on. So, is there any questions about what you heard as far? Okay.
Very enlightening. It is.
So now we're going to move on to the books of Judaism. So the first one we start off with is the Chumash, the first 5 books. I guess that would be 5, but it's, you know, we bind them as one thing a lot of the time, and kind of consider them one thing. The Pentateuch, if you speak Greek. And okay, that is the most binding. That is where all the laws are actually located. As far as what we call Torah law, right? This is what basically God originally gave. Laws that are in there, and laws that are derived from it. In other words, it's not said specifically what the details and parameters are and everything, but there's different ways of exegesis. Sorry, didn't mean to say the other name. That's a slip. Exegesis of how do you interpret this? We talked about before about, like, if I don't tell you how to even pronounce the words, you won't even know what it means, what it says. And then what does it actually mean? So, like, when we say, which we're going to go into later, about like tefillin, what are tefillin?
So
Okay.
is the Chumash the same thing as Torah, basically?
So Torah is I'm using this term specifically because Torah is a catch-all word, meaning it can mean this. If I'm learning another book, I could be, like I said before, I could be reading a book that was just written by some rabbi, yes, and I'm learning Torah. Torah
study, and it could be oral Torah or whatever.
Okay.
Right.
The reason we call everything else Torah is because everything, like, has its root in this, right? And it is just kind of expounding on this. Okay. When you talk about the prophets and the writings and everything else, just is really, like, in some way or other expounding on this. So it's all Torah, but I'm specifically talking about right now the Chumash. The Chumash was given by Moses himself, given to God, but given to us by Moses, and it was transmitted letter for letter. That's why if there's a letter missing, it's an issue, right? So every letter, every missing letter, every extra, sometimes you have extra letters, there's words that could be written either, for instance, you can write, let's say I want to write the word ot, which means a sign or a letter, right? So I can write it like this. So this is silent. This is a vav, but it's pronounced as when it's got a dot on top. The whole thing is pronounced as o, and that's a tav. And we went over tav before. It's the one that switches between t, s, and th. But I'm going to pronounce it ot, right? Mm-hmm. Means a letter, letter meaning like aleph is an ot, or it can mean a sign. Like in prophecy, that's often the word that's used for a sign, right? Or it can be written like this. Now this little dot is not usually written, right? The little dot was made up years later, hundreds of years later, to tell us, oh, this one is supposed to be pronounced as an O. So if you would see it just written with the letters, and this is how they write in Israel to this day, they write without vowels, right? So, this could be written one of these two ways. So this is called maleh, full, and this is called chaser, empty, or missing. So there's two ways to write a word. So sometimes the Torah will come around and write something like this. Sometimes it'll write this. If it chooses one or the other, it has a meaning. Specifically, if it is usually written this way and all of a sudden it's written this way. So you have to explain, why is it written this way this one time? One of the places that happens is when it writes Nisi'im, the princes, when they come to give the princes give a sacrifice at the inauguration of the tabernacle, and it writes Nisi'im missing a yud. Because and then we explained that they came last. After everybody had given, they said, well, we're going to make up the shortfall, and that was a shortcoming in them. They should have, really they should have come first. It was a nice gesture, but it was misguided. All right, so we have Chumash, right? That's the basic law. That's given directly to Moses, and that's like letter for letter, and that's pretty much, if we stop there, we would have all the basic stuff, minus a lot of the trappings. Then we have the writings and prophets, which actually incorporate a bunch of different books. But we put them all together. In Hebrew, they often call this Nach, which is an abbreviation for Nevi'im and Ketuvim. These are just extra dots because I touched the board. So these are kind of the next most authoritative, because they were written through Ruach Kodesh, through the spirit of prophecy. So they got a vision that they saw, and they wrote the book. Now I think also the letters in those also can have special meanings, the way things are written. But it's not as direct as that. One of the differences is that they got a much lower vision than Moshe. No prophet will be ever greater than Moshe. That's one of the 13 principles of the Rambam that he lays down, is if you don't believe in these 13 principles, you are a heretic. Okay, so then this was fine for centuries, and that's basically what we had. What happened was, actually there's some apocrypha, but we don't consider them. There's a few that they say have the Gemara quotes and stuff and says they're important, but it's not. They're nowhere near on the same level, and nobody reads them now. This was okay for hundreds of years. You had actually more than 1,000, I believe, because you had we had 410 years. We had 852 years from the giving of the Torah until the destruction of the first temple. And I think it was 852. It's very close if it's not. Then we had, so after the destruction of the first temple is when a lot of these books are written, or right around that time, right? And then you had so then you have 70 years interim, and then another 420 years of the second temple. And for all of that time, all those 490 years, you had basically no. There was no new. I'm sorry, not the 70 years, but 420 years. There was no new books. The way that Judaism is supposed to function is there's supposed to be a Sanhedrin, and there's supposed to be lower courts. So if a court knows the answer to something, right, they can debate it and whatever, and then they come up with the answer. Then you just hold by whatever that court is. Things that they don't know get escalated up to the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin decides, okay, the law is like this. They take a vote. Now you have to be special to be on the Sanhedrin. It's not a vote of just the populace, but they vote, and that becomes the law of the land. Even those who dissented have to agree with it. It's like the Supreme Court. So, but as long as it's remembered, they don't go and revisit it like the Supreme Court does. Then you have in the time of after the destruction of the second temple, there was the oral Torah that was passed down, and it was beginning to be lost. Now, I should say the writings and prophets do introduce a few like rabbinic laws. In particular, the one I know about is that you can't do business on Shabbat. That's not actually written down anywhere. Like, if I give you money and you give me a cake, is that okay? Right? That's not written down in the Chumash itself. We do it all the time where I just bring you a cake, for lunch, and it's not a problem. So the idea of exchanging of money, exchanging and stuff, that particularly is written down in Nehemiah. And so they did introduce some rabbinic laws in here, but until you get to the destruction of the second temple, after the destruction of the second temple, there was a rule by the Romans that the Jews could not meet as a group. So there was no way for the Sanhedrin to all get together, and in order to take a vote, you had to be able to debate it. So you had different courts, kind of forming by themselves. The earliest, I think, is Hillel and Shammai. Not really important, but I'll write it down. Hillel is very well known. Shammai less so. So Hillel and Shammai and their students became two separate groups, and they disagreed. And that was the first set of disagreements. And I think they disagreed on 6 things, if I remember, but I don't remember what they are. I don't think I ever knew what they all were.
For Shammai,
yeah.
What did he have something called the 18 measures or something like that? Did you hear about that?
18 measures.
Google it.
Okay.
Okay.
So actually, during the time of the second temple, also remember we had Hanukkah, and before that we had, Purim. So we had rabbinic. These are other rabbinic decrees that became part of the religion. Rabbinic law or Torah law will usually trump rabbinic law, and rabbinic law is easier to get out of if there's a great need. But otherwise, we treat rabbinic law and Torah law the same. And we have examples of rabbinic law all the way through the prophets and writings, and then, like I said, Hanukkah, which actually fell during the second temple. So Hillel and Shammai had disagreements, and you start having other disagreements, and they can't get together and settle them. So they stand as disagreements until we can, eventually a lot of times things got accepted one way or the other, but the agreements could still stand a lot of the time. So what they did was they felt that because of the dispersal that had happened and was continuing to happen, is that Jews would become, the oral Torah would be forgotten, because we were becoming too dispersed, and it was too hard to memorize everything, and live under all the persecution. So what they did was they decided, even though you weren't supposed to write it down, they decided to write it down. They wrote it down. Everybody had kept notebooks, which you were allowed to do. And they chose Rabbi Meir. They chose his notebook, basically. And the one who edited it was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And in English he's called Rabbi Judah the Prince. The Prince is really a misnomer. It's Nasi is the term is a president. We use it the Nasi of America. The a guy I know told me that his father had gone to Israel and he got caught, I think, with a knife or something that he wasn't supposed to have when he was going in through the security to go down to the Western Wall. And the guy was so nice to him, he was trying to say, "You're a prince," all right? And he was trying to, the one word he knew in Hebrew, he said, "Nasi." You don't usually use that word, and actually, like I said, it doesn't really mean prince. A prince would be a Ben Melech, the son of the king. So he said, "Oh, you're a Nasi, you're a Nasi." And the guard says, "Why is he calling me a Nazi?" So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi edited it and put out the official version. That version, I'm going to erase up till now. I'll leave that for now. The official version became known as the Mishnah. The Mishnah has 6 orders and is made up of a whole bunch of books, and I don't even know how many books there are in it. I brought one copy of one part with an English translation. This was actually considered, I should take that back. This is Bava Kama. Bava is a gate and Kama is first. This is laws of, has to do with laws of property damage. And actually it was originally one book, but when they started printing it, I think, or something, for whatever reason they chopped it into, the Gemara especially, it was huge, so they chopped it into 3 sections. The first gate, the middle gate, and the last gate, just to make it easier to print or write. So I'll give you, I'll just read the first Mishnah. We call the whole thing the Mishnah, or Mishnayot. Each one we also call a Mishnah. And the Mishnah comes from the word repetition. It also comes from one of the words for teach or learn. Shoneh means to learn, but it's not. That's not the more common word is lomed. All right. So there are 4 primary damagers. Are the bull, the pit, the maveh, and the fire. The bull is not like the maveh, nor is the maveh like the bull. These 2, which are living things, are not like the fire, which is not a living thing, nor are these, whose manner is to go forth and damage, like the pit, whose manner is not to go forth and damage. The common feature in them is that their manner is to damage, and you are responsible to watch them. And when it damages, the damager is obligated to pay for the damage with the best of the land. In other words, if you're paying with property, you have to pay with the good part of your property, not like, even though I give you a bigger piece, I give you a huge piece of desert and it's worth $1 million, or I give you a nice small farm, it's also worth $1 million. I have to give you the small farm, not the big chunk of desert. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. There were a bunch that, the Mishnah is very, very concise, and it is difficult sometimes to understand what it's talking about, partially because it's so concise. And there was a bunch of longer versions of things that were in the Mishnah that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but had been kept around in writing. So those are called Baraita, or Brisa. Bar is the Aramaic, is an Aramaic word for outside. In addition, it also means sun, as you probably know from bar mitzvah. However, an interesting fun fact is, because I know Christians actually quote it a lot, when it says, there's a, I think it's Psalm 2, says embrace, nashku var, is the Christian Bible is often interpreted as embrace the sun or kiss the sun. It actually means embrace purity. In Hebrew, var is pure. Okay, so you have Mishnah and Braita, right? These are longer versions, and so what happened is that these were both written in the land of Israel. After the destruction of the Second Temple, even though after the destruction of the First Temple, all the Jews left the land of Israel, and when they came back from Babylon, really it was kind of, a lot of it was the dregs of society. It wasn't, most of the important people, most of the learned people and stuff stayed in Babel. And in spite of that fact, the center of learning drifted over to the land of Israel, so that by the time we got to the Mishnah, that was the center of Torah. Now that the land of Israel has been conquered, it goes back to Babel. The people who had been living there the whole time was now Iraq. So the center of learning goes back there, but there's still Jews living in the land of Israel. They're around 500. This is around, give or take, let's say about 150 CE. Does everybody remember CE?
Central Common Era.
Yeah. Around 500 CE. This is how I remember it, and it's not exact dates. There had accumulated disagreements about what did this mean. So they started writing down the disagreements, and also discussions, not only just disagreements, but also the discussions, because it was felt that even this was meant to be basically a memory guide, right? Okay, you can't memorize everything. Let me give you some mnemonics and everything. So sometimes it's written with sort of extra words and stuff, just so that it follows a certain pattern, so it'll be easier to memorize. This is kind of meant as a memory aid. In that they write 2 Talmuds or Gemara. Gemara and Talmud are often used interchangeably. So Gemara and Talmud. These are just one word, okay? I think most Orthodox Jews, normally we use the term Gemara. We do use Talmud also, but it's not as common. Unless you're saying, this is much less common usage than this in the religious world. You had 2 of them. You had the Yerushalmi. Anyone want to guess where that's from?
Israel.
Jerusalem.
Very good. I don't think it was actually written in Jerusalem, but it's from the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the Bavli.
Babylon.
Right. The Babylonian Talmud. I said that the center of Torah had switched. And actually it's very interesting. If you actually ever do get to read in these, a lot of times they insult each other.
Wow.
Left and right. The center of Torah had switched over to Babel, and this one became like the accepted one. Today, so this one has like all the commentaries, like Rashi wrote a commentary on it, so we can understand that Rashi is incredibly important to understand, just understanding what words mean. One of the things he did was he wrote, it's interesting, he wrote a lot of things he would write, he would explain what the word was, and then he would write, a lot of his stuff is not explanation of words, a lot of it is just kind of telling you basically what's going on. But a lot of times he would write definitions of words, and he would give you a definition of the word, and then he would write what it was in Old French. The thing is now, is that nobody knows Old French, so they use Rashi to figure out Old French. Because people still don't understand the Hebrew in Rashi. So he wrote a commentary on this. He did not write a commentary on this. They're both written in Aramaic, but they're different dialects. So like a lot of the words don't carry over. And basically, this one today is only used when this one doesn't contradict it. If these two talk about the same thing, but have a different opinion, we go with this one. If this talks about something that isn't mentioned over here, we'll probably give it some credence. All right, so you have Talmud and Bavli, and what happened was they often, it's written in a form of, and I have an English one, I guess, but I didn't get an English one. I just grabbed, this is Bava Metzia, this is the middle gate, but this is the Gemara. So I'll just give you an idea of what it looks like. So what they do is, okay, this printing, actually, the printing style that they use, it started in, I think, it was after the printing press, right? It was like 1600s, I think. They got permission to print the first ones. They printed an edition in Vilna, which is in Lithuania, and they laid out the page and whatever. And then what happened was people got so used to this style that to this day they're all printed, almost all, with some slight variations, but they're almost all printed exactly the same. So that if you say turn to page 39, everybody has the same page 39, even though they're from different printing companies, right? So when they went to print it, they also said, well, let's create a different looking script so that you can tell what things are Rashi and stuff like. So they call it Rashi script, even though Rashi never wrote like this. They and you have to learn to read it. My daughter learned it when she was in like 3rd grade or something like that. After they knew Hebrew, the alphabet and everything, then they started learning the Rashi script. What they do is they first take a chunk of Mishnah, and then you see these two big letters here, Gimel Mem. That stands for Gemara. So everything from here down is Mishnah, and then Gemara starts a stream of consciousness discussion. So basically, they'll start talking about something, and they'll say, you know what, this sounds like a conversation. Really, this sounds like it's related to the dispute over here. Oh, well, since that dispute involved Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to mention everything Rabbi Yochanan ever said, because I guess he didn't say that much or whatever, and and then they'll go off in this wild discussion that doesn't necessarily have and sometimes they won't conclude. Sometimes you'll get and you'll get one opinion, they'll say, no, really it's this, and then the next thing says, no, really it's this, and then and there's rules that you have to know about. Well, when you get to the end, did it come out like anybody? And if so, whom? So this is how they do it. On this side is Rashi, and on this side is Tosafot. And it's always, Rashi is always the inner. So this side over here is Rashi, on this one is this side, and Tosafot is always on the outer. Tosafot, Rashi lived in, I think, about 1000 in the city. I know he lived for, I think, the large part of his life in the city of Worms in Alsace-Lorraine, which is was part of Germany, I think, or well, I guess it was. He spoke, like I said, he knew French, so it's that disputatory between.
And who's the outer? What's the writer?
Oh, Tosafot. Tosafot is not one writer.
What's that?
It's Tosafot are the editions, and there was a group. I think all of them or most of them were actually Rashi's grandchildren, and basically they took his commentary and would comment on his stuff where they didn't agree with him. So those are the two of the earliest what they call Rishonim. All right, let's we'll go through who the different groups are in a minute. Actually, while we're at it, then the Mishnah and Baraita, the group, what they call the rabbis from that period that are quoted in there, they call these ones the Tanaim. Tanaim. Or Tana is singular. The group that wrote the, to distinguish them, they call these, the group from the Gemara is called, both in Israel and outside, are called Amoraim. Okay. Then you have a group that did write some works, actually particularly in philosophy, but I don't know that, I think they had some halachic works, but they're not, people don't, is not kind of in the same line. It's called the Geonim. And Gaon in Hebrew is genius. And that, like I said, they lived in, they wrote in Arabic, and they lived around like 900 or so, like in the, you know, the kind of the golden age of Spain and everything. They were influenced by the Muslim style and everything, you know, philosophy, and were often arguing with either the Muslims or the Karaites, who were a heretical sect that rejected the oral Torah. Okay, so you have the Gemaras. Then you have a line down as far as halachic law works. Jewish law. It's called halakha. Halakha. Right? So you have a line of the. Okay, so you have the Rif. The Rif took this, the Bavli. Yeah, this all goes off the Bavli. The Rif took the Bavli, and he would quote only the parts of it that were according to the law. So there was a discussion, and it ended, and the last guy had like 3 sentences, and we hold that way. He would just write down those 3 sentences or whatever, right? But it was still in this order of stream of consciousness. It's all over the place. So you could find a law about Shabbat in you know, in the laws of damages, just because that happened to be like come up for some reason. So this goes down to the Rambam. I'm going to erase everything until now. Actually, I don't usually do this, but since we're doing a lot of Torah stuff. Oops, I did that wrong. Let's do it the simple way. Bezrat Hashem, with the help of God, should be able to teach this class and not have everything fall apart. Okay. Okay, so the Rambam wrote a book called the Yad HaChazakah. The strong hand. Yad is 14, and he broke his book down into 14 sub-books, and he covered everything. And what he did was, instead of quoting from the Gemara, he just wrote down, like, what is the law about something, and he would do it based on a topic, right? So he's known as the first codifier of the law. He wrote it down as a code of, you know, these are laws pertaining to, you know, kashrut. These are laws pertaining to kings. We read the end of his book of Kings, I think. No, we didn't do that in this one, in previous classes.
What do you call it? I'm not pronouncing it right. The Shivakaru?
That comes later. Okay. So, so he wrote down, he was the first one to write it down as instead of in stream of consciousness order, in a categorization. These are laws having to do with this, these are laws having to do with that, right? So he was in the I want to say around 1200. Maybe off about that. No, wait a minute. No, I think it was like around 1100, because the Ramban, who actually gave him a lot of credence, because people hated this work. He was not one to have any false humility, and he wrote stuff like that. You don't really have to study anything else. So, besides my work, and there was another rabbi who was older than him called the Ravid, who disagreed with him on a lot of things. And it got so bad that at one point they were burning his work, and then the French, and this is in France, and the French non-Jews said, "Hey, if you can burn one thing, why not burn another thing?" So they started burning copies of the Talmud, and then there's a famous rabbi there. I want to say Bachaya. I'm not sure if that's right. No, that's not right. Rabbi Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah, who wrote a book on repentance after that happened, because he was one of the ones say, yeah, we should burn it. He was like, this wasn't a good idea. In any case, the Rambam wrote a book codifying everything. Along came in the 1600s Rav Yosef Karo. Karo. He lived in Sfat. He lived in Sfat in the land of Israel. This is also the time of the Kabbalists. Oh, I missed the Zohar. The Zohar was actually discovered. It's claimed to be. This is like actually much earlier. I'll put it down here. The Zohar is a book of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is it's mysticism, meaning how does the world run in the upper spheres, and there's there's different spherot of the layers of and the highest layer is God, and it comes down and filters down through different levels and everything, and just basically like what happens when we do certain things up in the celestial worlds and stuff. I've learned tiny bits of it and stuff, so I don't really know that much, but it's claimed to have been written by Rabbi what's his name? Shimon Bar Yochai. I'll put his name up here. There's a holiday nowadays on his yard site, the anniversary of his death, where people make bonfires on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, and people go to his grave in Israel, and it's a madhouse. I've been there once on that day with a field trip from the yeshiva, and I didn't even get near it. And then we went on another day, just my family and stuff. Yeah, it was like practically empty. There was like a couple of guys in there. That's it. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived at the time, he was a Tana. He lived at the time of the Mishnah, around 1st century or something, or 2nd century, I believe, CE. So, but it wasn't discovered until the 14th century, and there were claims that it was a fake and stuff. But it's become accepted. Whatever it is, it's accepted, and that's where like the Jewish mysticism stuff comes from. When you talk about Kabbalists and stuff, that's what they study.
So, Bobby, as far as for the Orthodox Jew, do they believe the stuff in the Zohar, or do they? Yeah. And do they consider it maybe part like the oral Torah a little and stuff like that?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And it quotes like it's all quoting what do you call it? Tanaim, people from that period.
Is that the same thing like as the Great Assembly? Is that who made up those people?
No, the Great Assembly was during the time of the right after the return at the beginning of the Second Temple.
Okay.
After that was the last of the prophets, plus some other people made up the Great Assembly, and the one thing they're mainly known for doing is putting together the liturgy, the basic idea of having the 18, now 19 blessings, even though we still call it the 18, because once something goes in, you can't get it back out. Once you start calling it the 18, even when we had the 19th, we're not changing
well, the
name.
19th is actually a curse, right?
So
it really still is 18 blessings.
Yeah. Well, it's a blessing because it's that the basically that the heretics won't have any power. So it's not necessarily it's that the heretics will be humbled and everything. It's not necessarily, although you could read it that way, that they'll be destroyed. But it's also just that they won't be confusing everybody. Okay, so that was the Zohar, but it has validity. It's accepted in the Orthodox world. It has been for hundreds of years now, but it's not actually, like, in some respects it's not that important. It doesn't. There are certain things that, especially in the Sephardic world, that in the Hasidic world, they're done because of Kabbalah, but the vast majority of it is the vast majority of Jewish law, which is our focus. Right? Everything we do is based on a commandment. Right? That's what we live for. God told us to do something. We're trying to figure out how to do it, and we're supposed to want to do it, and we're supposed to try and want to do even some things that are optional. So our whole life revolves around commandments. So any book that is on other things, it's not necessarily unimportant, but it's not. We would survive without it, whatever it is. Don't tell them about Richard Zach, because they don't like it if you mess with their Tanya.
Yeah.
Which is also an important book and also accepted, but if we didn't have it until whenever he wrote it, which is after 1700. I don't know. The Hasidic movement didn't start until the 1700s. All right, we had Rabbi Yosef Karo. He wrote a very famous book called the Shulchan Aruch. He was also involved in something very fascinating, where they wanted to restart the Sanhedrin in his day. And there's an opinion in the Rambam that if you got all of the great leaders of the land of Israel together, they could confer. One of the problems we have with creating the Sanhedrin is that there was a direct line of smicha, of ordination, laying on of hands from Moshe Rabbeinu through the time of the Mishnah. Well, after the time of the Mishnah, certainly by the end of the Gemara, that had stopped. I forget when it stopped, but it had stopped. So they tried to revive it, and they gave it to him. And then they decided, based on somebody who was very against it, he decided not to pass it on to anybody else. So that was the first attempt to restart the Sanhedrin. So he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He basically took the Rambam and two other rabbis, the Tur and Tur and the Rush, which I think is usually written like this, but it's pronounced as an Rush. And he basically took a consensus opinion. Oh, sorry, not the Rush. The Rambam and the Tur, and I think it was the Rush. In any case, he had two Sephardim and one Ashkenaz. And so he would take, like, the majority opinion of the three and write it down in his book. Well, that comes out as a Sephardic book, right, because he took the majority of three, and two of them had one opinion. So he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and he put it out there. And there was a rabbi named Rav Moshe Isserles. Isserles, I think is how you spell it. He's known as the Ramah, as an abbreviation of his initials, with rabbi at the beginning. He saw this book, he thought it was a great idea, but he was Ashkenaz. So he was, the incredible humility, I think, that he decided, I'm not going to write my own book. I'm going to just put in my notes about how we do things here in Ashkenazi land. So he wrote what they call a gloss, and he called it the Mapah. Shulchan Aruch means the set table, and the Mapah is a tablecloth, like the same word we get map from. So he basically, wrote it in as notes, and therefore it became one book, and it was still called the Shulchan Aruch, but everybody pretty much accepted it. And even though there were differences of halakha up to that point, there's always, like, if it's not 100% clear, there's always going to be, like, you're going to have somebody differ on something. So, so it became the standard text across the Jewish world. There have been other books of halakha written after that. In particular, nowadays the most famous is the Mishnah Brura. Oh, the Yad HaChazakah is also called the Mishnah Torah. Mishnah or Mishneh Torah, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Like I said, it means repetition. So repetition of the Torah, and Mishnah Brura means the explained repetition, the clear repetition. So he wrote a commentary. He died in 1934. He's also known as the Chavetz Chaim for his book that he wrote about gossip. And he wrote the Mishnah Brura, and he died in 1934. He lived in Rodin, Poland, and it's a commentary on it with his opinion and more, sometimes more elucidation about details and stuff like that. He wrote that as a commentary, and now it's people actually will study that book in particular. You read the Shulchan Aruch part, and then you go and read his commentary for more information, basically. Now that is basically like very, very main books of Judaism. You have the Lubavitcher, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, wrote a book called Tanya. That's very important, particularly to the Lubavitchers. The Lubavitchers have become a big movement, so it has a lot of standing in the Jewish world. There are lots of other books, obviously, but these are kind of the main foundational books. The book that I started teaching out of, that I basically started the first few classes, was Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato. He's called the Ramchal, right? And it's I always forget how many Z's and T's are. I think it's this in English. He lived in Italy, and he wrote three books that I know about. One is Derech Hashem, which is the one I talked about. This is the philosophy of why did God create the world, heaven and hell, that sort of thing. He wrote a book called Mesilat Yesharim that studied a lot, which is basically, he wrote it as a guide to how do you attain prophecy. You have to get to a certain level to attain prophecy, and there's, I think, there's like 48 steps or something like that. But no, I'm thinking of something else. But people were basically, everybody agrees, like, we're all stuck at base level 1, but it's good to know the other steps. And it's like, once you achieve this, then you should work on that. So there's like, being careful and deliberate and stuff, and then there's like being, going on from that to being what they call alacrity, like, being gung-ho and doing stuff early and everything. But anyways, he's very famous in the Orthodox world as a book to study. Let's see. I think I'm going to wrap that up unless you guys have questions. Okay. You can find bits of his books on the internet. I forget what the other book is. Those are the two that I have read something out of, at least. Oh, The Knowing Heart, I think, was his, on philosophy, I believe.
Okay.
I think this is his third book. You also have a few interesting books. We talked about the Disputation already in class by the Ramban, of his notes of his debate with the Christian. Another interesting book is there was a group in somewhere around the Ukraine called the Khazars, and they en masse converted to Judaism. And there was a rabbi, Yehuda Halevi, who lived in Spain, who heard about this king. And the story was that the king had invited a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim to come and debate and discuss with him. And after the debate, he decided on Judaism. And it's unclear that whether this was just Rabbi Halevi's idea of what the conversation would be like, or if somehow he had some way of knowing things that were discussed. But he wrote a book called the Kuzari, based on the name, which is also the Khazars, which is also a very famous work on philosophy. And I think all these are available in English that I've mentioned so far, I think. Any questions? No New Testament, no Quran, no Book of Mormon. We have the same opinion about all of them.
So Bobby, let me ask you this. I think one night you were supposed to bring your tefillin, right?
We're going to do that next class.
Oh, okay. All right.
Or, we'll discuss it after this class about which class it's going to be, but probably next class.
Okay. All right.
And they're here, so it makes it easier.
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
Anything else about books? Or Zionism?
Hey, let me ask you. I on the Chumash, I thought that I might be wrong, but I was thinking that the way it's kind of split up is that it has that. Does it have the Haftorah parts with the Torah portion you're supposed to read each week?
When I talk about
together?
Chumash, I'm only talking about the first 5 books.
Okay.
However, when they print the Chumash as a help for people who are using it in synagogue, they will print the Haftorah with it most of the time. And that depends on where they put it, depends on the publisher. Sometimes they put it at the end. You do the Torah reading, and then at the bottom is the Haftorah, and sometimes at the end, you know, in what order they put them in. Like sometimes they put the special ones first. Sometimes they put them last. Sometimes they print, and the stone ones they print. Also the 5 Megillot that we read throughout the year at different times, like Esther and Ruth, and Kohelet is Ecclesiastes, and
Jonah one?
Huh?
Jonah?
Yonah, yeah. Yeah, Yonah was read on Yom Kippur in the afternoon. And is that 5? I don't know, I'm counting.
Ecclesiastes.
And Lamentations, that's read on Tisha B'Av. So those are all books. Those are all the Haftarah are taken from the prophets, and they have some connection to either the weekly parsha or sometimes to the time of year. Yonah, we discussed the whole idea of fasting and repentance and stuff is major in Yonah. It's the only example that we really have where like people repent. And it's explicit that they got forgiven, and the decree was overturned.
Did he also write the book The Path of the Just?
Yeah, that's Mesilat Yesharim. Sorry,
Okay.
It's Path of the Just in English.
Okay.
That's the one I was saying. It tells you, the idea is how you gain prophecy, but it's step by step. Once you've achieved this, then you should start working on this. And you're like, man, I never achieved that.
It's a heavy read.
Yeah. I get depressed reading that book, but that's just me. Derech Hashem is you would see a lot of the early classes in this course.
They're just smart people.
And the guy
thinkers.
The guy who translated them was incredible. He died at like 42, and he was known for brilliance and was a prolific writer himself. R.E.A. Kaplan. He's got several books. He got a book on Jewish meditation. He translated all of those Tzaddik books. He translated a whole bunch of other things. He was actually, I think, head of NCSY, one of the Orthodox youth groups. Also, Israeli society. This would be also a good time if you have any questions about Israeli society. Not that I've lived there.
It's complex. I can see just the study of Zionism. Like, wow. I can see why the political struggle goes as it goes.
Yeah, there's a big battle between the religious and the non-religious on all fronts, and even to some extent between the religious, the Haredim and the other religious Zionists. Like I said, on a lot of different issues and stuff, and they've kind of divided into camps, and it's really a shame because it's hard to transition between the camps, and you do get sometimes somebody saying that they saw this one guy, he was obviously not religious, and they had him as a guard or something like that on a trip, and they see him putting on tefillin the one time, and they're like, "You put on tefillin?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not religious, but I'm Jewish." Okay, we're wrapping up.
You were saying that
Anybody
wants
to ask a question?